Think about those moments, when you see an older friend or maybe a family member struggling a bit with their memory, constantly searching for their glasses or maybe forgetting what they were just saying.
Hmm.
It's so easy to just chalk it up to getting older, right? Those classic senior moments.
Yeah, that's the default assumption, isn't it?
But what if we're missing something? I mean, what if those slips, the ones that seem age-related, could actually be linked to something we usually think of with kids' ADHD?
Yeah.
And what if that ADHD has actually been there all along, maybe never diagnosed, and it's just showing up differently now in their later years?
Well, that's exactly the crucial point, and it's so often overlooked. We're going to explore that today.
Mhm.
There's this common idea that ADHD is something people just outgrow.
Right.
But the resources you've shared,
Mm-hmm.
really insightful stuff from attitude, ADD, GTDD, and there's that compelling research paper from PubMed Central too.
Yeah.
They all point to ADHD sticking around. It doesn't just vanish at age 25.
No, it keeps going.
It absolutely can and does affect people well into their 60s, 70s, even beyond.
Okay, let's try and unpack this a bit, because the idea of ADHD having a real impact, or maybe even being noticed for the first time when someone's, say, 65 or 70, that might seem kind of surprising to people.
It can be, definitely.
So our goal with this deep dive really is to understand what ADHD actually looks like in older adults. We want to explore the real challenges in getting diagnosed, getting the right support at that stage of life,
Yeah.
and importantly, uncover some potential strategies and resources, all based on the information in these sources we've got.
Exactly. And maybe the first thing to grasp is that ADHD symptoms aren't static. They can change, they evolve as we age.
Okay.
Dr. Kathleen Nadeau, for instance, she did extensive interviews over 130 older adults with ADHD, and she really highlighted how ADHD presents differently compared to childhood or even young adulthood.
Right. And some of the specific patterns she found in these older adults are pretty revealing, aren't they? Like what she calls Swiss cheese memory.
Yeah, that's a great description. It's not
Mhm.
like a complete memory wipe, but it's just unreliable, unpredictable gaps pop up.
And then there are working memory problems, like being easily thrown off track in the middle of doing something.
Absolutely. Losing your train of thought mid-task, constantly misplacing everyday things, keys, phone, wallet, struggling to find the right word during a conversation.
Oh, that feeling when your mind just goes blank.
Exactly. That was reported frequently too. So what we're maybe seeing is that as the brain naturally ages, those underlying executive function inconsistencies from lifelong ADHD just become more noticeable. They show up as these frustrating memory glitches and difficulties staying focused.
And what's tricky here is how easily those things could be mistaken for just typical signs of getting older.
That's the crux of the diagnostic challenge, isn't it? We all associate forgetting words or misplacing keys with aging.
Huh.
But for someone who's maybe had undiagnosed ADHD their whole life, these aren't new problems. They're old problems, maybe just louder now or expressing themselves a bit differently.
That makes sense. And it's not just memory stuff either, right? Nadeau also mentioned difficulties learning new things.
And sometimes talking too much or interrupting others in conversations. Trouble following along in group chats.
Which can lead to issues maintaining relationships, I imagine.
It can, yeah. And beyond that, things like chronic disorganization at home, maybe even significant financial struggles, possibly stemming from a lifetime of difficulty with impulse control or managing money due to inattention. These were common themes too.
Wow. So connecting this all together, these aren't just small annoyances. They sound like things that could seriously impact someone's independence, their social life.
Oh, absolutely. Their overall well-being and quality of life can really take a hit.
And Nadeau actually asked these older adults about their biggest challenges, didn't she? What came out on top?
Yeah, 5 key areas really stood out consistently. First, just struggling to get things done. You know, that chronic procrastination, difficulty with follow-through. Second, problems with emotional regulation. So more irritability, maybe anxiety, mood swings. Third, those ongoing time management and organization hurdles.
Still there after all those years.
Still there. Fourth, what they called remnants of hyperactivity, maybe not bouncing off the walls, but like persistent restlessness, racing thoughts.
Internal restlessness.
Exactly. And fifth, continuing social challenges, often feeling misunderstood or like people just don't get them.
These really show how ADHD isn't just about paying attention. It hits emotions, planning, organization, social skills, even later in life.
It's pervasive across so many areas.
And this brings up a really interesting point from the sources. Nadeau makes this parallel between older adults losing structure when they retire and young adults losing structure when they leave home, both groups suddenly have less of that external routine, that scaffolding from work or school schedules.
Right, and that lack of structure can really turn up the volume on underlying ADHD symptoms. It can affect really basic things: sleep, eating habits, even self-care.
That external scaffolding, it's like it was unconsciously helping them compensate all those years, right, for the internal struggles with organization and planning.
Precisely. And when it disappears, those challenges can suddenly feel much bigger, much harder to manage on their own.
So, okay, we've talked about this wide range of symptoms. You might think, well, diagnosis in older adulthood should be pretty straightforward again.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But the sources really paint a different picture. There's a pretty significant diagnostic dilemma here.
Which is?
How do doctors tell the difference between ADHD in an older person and just normal age-related cognitive changes? Or even, the early signs of something like mild cognitive impairment, MCI.
Yeah, that's crucial because so many of these symptoms we've mentioned, memory lapses, trouble with routines, executive function issues, they do overlap with MCI, maybe even early dementia signs.
They absolutely do. So if an older person, especially someone with no known ADHD history, starts reporting memory problems, the first thought for many doctors is likely going to be MCI.
So if memory issues can show up in normal aging and MCI and ADHD, how do they look different? What are the nuances?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, in typical aging, memory decline is often gradual, maybe affecting recent events more. In MCI, the problems are usually more noticeable both to the person and others, and might interfere more with daily life.
Okay. And ADHD.
With ADHD, the memory issue is often more about that inconsistency, the Swiss cheese thing we mentioned. You might remember some obscure detail from years ago perfectly.
But forget why you walked into a room 5 seconds ago.
Exactly. It often seems more tied to failures in attention or working memory, holding information in mind right now, rather than a fundamental problem with storing or retrieving memories overall. Though, of course, it feels like a memory problem to the person experiencing it.
And it's not always one or the other, is it? The sources mentioned that MCI and ADHD could potentially show up together in some people.
That's right, they can co-occur, which makes diagnosis even more complex. There's a real need for more research focused specifically on teasing apart that overlap.
Definitely. What about the dementia link? Is there a connection between ADHD and, say, Alzheimer's?
Currently, the research doesn't show a direct causal link between ADHD and Alzheimer's or most dementias. There is, however, a more complex, kind of murky association being explored with Lewy body dementia, but that needs a lot more investigation.
Oh.
Some researchers think maybe certain lifestyle factors, things like chronic sleep disruption, or maybe dietary habits that can be common in both conditions, might play some indirect role in any observed links. But it's still very much an evolving field.
And we also have to remember, some cognitive changes are just a normal part of aging for everyone.
Absolutely.
And especially for women, right? Hormonal changes during menopause can sometimes bring on things like brain fog or memory fuzziness.
Yes, that's another important layer. It really highlights how crucial it is for clinicians to be skilled at telling apart these typical age-related shifts from genuine lifelong ADHD.
Is there a simple way to think about that distinction?
Dr. Goodman offers a helpful perspective. He basically says, if someone starts having significant forgetfulness or distractibility pretty much for the first time in later life, it's more likely related to aging or potentially MCI.
Okay, new onset, probably aging MCI.
Generally speaking. But if those kinds of symptoms, the inattention, the impulsivity, the restlessness, have been a consistent theme throughout their entire life, stretching way back to childhood or their teens.
Then ADHD should be seriously considered.
Exactly. That long-term history is absolutely critical information when evaluating an older adult.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's say someone in their 60s or 70s thinks, hey, this sounds like me.
Yeah.
What kind of roadblocks might they hit trying to get diagnosed and treated?
Unfortunately, quite a few. For starters, most of the standard ADHD diagnostic tools, the questionnaires and checklists, they're overwhelmingly designed for kids and teenagers.
Not really suited for capturing how ADHD might look in a 7-year-old.
Not optimally, no.
Yeah.
They might not pick up on the more subtle or differently expressed symptoms in older adults.
And I can imagine it being really hard for an older person to accurately remember the exact onset and progression of symptoms from way back in childhood. Memory itself can be fuzzy, as we discussed.
Precisely. That recall piece is a major challenge. And then there's the issue of training for doctors and therapists.
Lack of it, you mean?
Yeah, there's a significant gap. Medical school often gives ADHD fairly brief coverage, mostly focused on pediatrics, One source, I think it was an ADDitude article, mentioned a survey where a surprising number of primary care doctors said they'd never even encountered an adult patient with ADHD.
Wow. Statistically, that seems unlikely.
Very unlikely. It really points to a lack of recognition and awareness in the medical community about adult ADHD in general, let alone in seniors.
Okay, so getting the diagnosis is tough. What about treatment if someone does get diagnosed? Are there hurdles there too? I think the sources mentioned some hesitation around stimulant meds.
Yes, that's a factor. Some doctors are understandably cautious about prescribing stimulants to older adults. They worry about potential pre-existing heart conditions, interactions with other medications the person might be taking.
Which older adults often are.
Right. And just general concerns about side effects in this age group. However, experts like Dr. Nadeau really stress the urgent need for better tools and clear treatment guidelines, specifically for seniors with ADHD.
So they aren't just denied potentially helpful treatment because of age.
Exactly. It's crucial to ensure older adults have access to the support and interventions that could really make a difference for them. The medical field really needs to catch up here.
It really does sound like it. But, okay, let's shift focus. What happens when someone does finally get that diagnosis later in life? What's the impact? What are the benefits?
Well, the articles you shared had some really powerful personal stories, like Linda Rogley, diagnosed at 45.
Okay.
Her first reaction was apparently disbelief. Like, no way, I'm successful in business, I can't have ADHD.
I can see that reaction.
But as she learned more, things started clicking into place. Her lifelong reliance on caffeine to focus, how she thrived under intense deadline pressure, that constant underlying feeling of being scattered even when she was achieving things, it all started to make sense through the lens of ADHD.
So the diagnosis was like a
Yeah.
key, unlocking understanding.
Absolutely. It sounds like it kickstarted a real journey of self-discovery for her. Understanding how her brain worked, finding support, and then actually changing her life to align better with her strengths and challenges, instead of constantly fighting against her natural grain.
Giving herself permission to work with her brain, not against it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Teresa Sullivan Barger had a similar kind of aha moment in midlife. She felt overwhelmed. Initially, I thought maybe menopause, but finding out ADHD was a major factor, gave her a framework, a way to understand what was going on. And Dr. Weitzel makes the point that just knowing the diagnosis can be incredibly powerful. It allows for personalized plans and a way forward.
These stories really drive home the emotional impact, don't they? It's way more than just a label. It's understanding yourself after potentially decades of struggle.
For sure. And finding strategies that actually work. It seems there's really no age limit on when that kind of insight can be beneficial.
Definitely not. And the sources also talked about the importance of support and community, right?
Oh, hugely important. ADDA, that's the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, they offer a whole range of virtual peer support groups specifically for adults with ADHD.
That's fantastic. Virtual makes it accessible, too.
It does. And what's great is they have specific groups tailored for different people, like women over 50, people who are newly diagnosed, all sorts of different demographics and needs.
So you can connect with people who really get it.
Precisely. Kathleen Nadeau observed how vital this is. Finding these supportive communities can make a massive difference for older adults with ADHD, less isolation, a sense of belonging, and practical tips from people who've been there.
That makes total sense. Now, beyond support groups, that PubMed Central research paper you shared looked at something else interesting: exercise.
Yes, a really interesting non-medication angle. It explored the link between physical fitness, specifically cardiorespiratory fitness, or CRF, and executive functioning.
Okay, CRF, like aerobic fitness.
Exactly. How efficiently your heart and lungs work. They looked at this in adults, both with and without ADHD diagnoses. They used some virtual cognitive tests to measure things like attention, mental flexibility, working memory.
And how did they measure the fitness part?
They used a 6-minute walk test. It gives an estimate of someone's CRF based on how far they can walk in 6 minutes.
Simple enough. So what did they find? What was the link?
This is the really interesting part. They found a specific significant connection between higher estimated CRF, so better fitness and better inhibitory control.
Inhibitory control. Remind
That's
me.
basically the brain's braking system. It helps you resist impulses, ignore distractions, stay focused on your goal, think, stop, and think.
Got it. So better fitness linked to better breaks.
Specifically in the adults who had ADHD.
Oh, specifically in the ADHD group.
Yes. That strong link wasn't really seen for the other executive functions they tested, like cognitive flexibility or working memory. And it wasn't observed in the neurotypical control group either.
Wow. So translating that, Regular physical activity, the kind that improves your cardiovascular fitness,
Uh-huh.
could be a really valuable non-medication strategy for older adults with ADHD to help manage that impulsivity, that difficulty staying on task, particularly the stop and think part.
It certainly suggests that, yes. It's encouraging because exercise is relatively accessible and has tons of other health benefits anyway. It points towards a practical way to potentially improve focus and manage those impulsive urges.
That's great potential. Okay, one last area highlighted in the source is gender differences. The CDC data mentioned in an ADtude article was quite striking.
It was. It showed that significantly more women than men actually receive their ADHD diagnosis in adulthood.
What were the numbers again?
I think it was around 61% of women diagnosed as adults compared to only 40% of men.
That's a big difference. Why might that be?
Well, a couple of reasons are often suggested. One is that women might not recognize their own ADHD symptoms until maybe their own children get diagnosed, and then they see the similarities.
The penny drops then.
Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. Also, women are unfortunately more frequently misdiagnosed first with things like anxiety or depression, which, by the way, can absolutely coexist with ADHD or even be worsened by undiagnosed ADHD.
So the underlying ADHD gets missed.
It can, yes. This really underlines how important it is for doctors and therapists to be aware that ADHD can look different in women. It's often less about the stereotypical hyperactivity you might see in boys and more about inattention, disorganization, maybe feeling overwhelmed internally.
Recognizing those different presentations is key for accurate diagnosis across the lifespan then.
Absolutely crucial for women of all ages.
Okay, so as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive, the big takeaway seems pretty clear. ADHD isn't just for kids.
Not at all. It's a lifelong reality that can really impact older adults, even if it flew under the radar for decades.
And while, yes, some cognitive changes are normal with aging, those persistent lifelong patterns of struggling with attention or impulsivity or that inner restlessness,
Hmm.
they shouldn't just be brushed off as, oh, they're just getting old. They could absolutely signal underlying ADHD that could benefit from being recognized and supported.
Exactly. Don't dismiss lifelong patterns.
So if you're listening and some of these challenges we've talked about really hit home, either for you or someone you know, the advice from these sources is pretty strong. Think about seeking a proper evaluation.
Yes, from a healthcare professional who actually has experience with adult ADHD, that specialization is important.
And remember, there are resources out there, like those ADDA virtual support groups we mentioned,
Really valuable.
and also the potential benefits of lifestyle things, like regular exercise, which might help manage some symptoms.
Definitely worth exploring.
So now that you've taken this deep dive with us into this often overlooked area, ADHD and older adulthood, maybe take a moment. What long-held assumptions might you reconsider now? About yourself, maybe, or about others, regarding attention, focus, and just the whole process of aging?
Yeah, what might it mean to look at these challenges through a new lens with this understanding? It's
Mm.
definitely some food for thought.